Evening, so I've just gotten home from work. I'm really excited this evening because I've just received something I've been hunting for a very long time. I've been searching for it, and finally, after waiting for a very long time after purchasing it, it's arrived. Unfortunately, I can't do a dramatic unboxing video because it's just arrived as it is, but still I'm really excited regardless to share it with you. So I've just received this giant mysterious red book. It truly is gigantic. I mean, the size of it is almost an adult torso, and also very thick, very heavy, yet very mysterious. You don't really see an inscription or description on the back or the front, except for the side where you get the gold title, The Red Book, written by Carl Gustav Jung. Now, this book is really fascinating. It's very mysterious. It's written by Carl Gustav Jung, who, for those of you who don't know, is actually one of the fathers of psychology, largely considered to be the father of modern analytical psychology. Why so mysterious? Because for most of existence after he's written this book, it's actually been hidden deliberately from people. It's always been in the corner of his office. People would see this red book. They would ask him about it, but he'd never show anyone. He's never shown it to anyone. And after he passed away, as his son was sorting through his estate, his property, and he found this really interesting looking red book, he looked through it, had a few glances of it, and he decided it should never be shown to anyone. And he decided to hide it as well. It was eventually locked up in a bank vault somewhere in Switzerland. Again, never shown to anyone until in 2009 when the Jung estate decided to finally publish it in limited quantities, and here it is. But why? Why all the mystery? Why keep it from people? What's actually within the book that's made it such a necessary secret? Now, to really know that story, we have to go back a bit and know the story of Jung. Jung, along with Sigmund Freud, are both widely regarded as the fathers of psychology as we know it today. They both believe that we should really study the human mind, build an understanding of our psyche. Freud was the mentor of Jung, and Freud believed that the human mind really requires a very scientific sort of study to go into the psyche, to study the unconscious undercurrents that really shows the irrationalities, the chaos, these unconscious desires. And if we can study them in the way that a physician studies a pathology, if we can study that in that very meticulous scientific way, then we can potentially treat some of these things and build a better understanding of it. And Jung was really an active student of Freud. He was enamored by his mentor, and both of them really spearheaded the development of psychology as we know it today. And Jung, under the tutelage of Freud, also became quite a promising psychologist. He built a very successful practice. He was quite successful at a young age. But in spite of all of his success under the mentorship of Freud, Jung was very, very inquisitive. He wanted to expand his limits of understanding psychology and really develop the field even further. He started to become very eccentric in how he would build even more understanding on the human psyche and the human essence. He started to go into the esoteric, studying areas like spirituality, mythology, philosophy, even sometimes doing things that are really within the fringe areas of parapsychology. For example, participating in spiritualism experiments like seances. And he was also very unique in his approach. For example, he would work in a mental hospital, a mental asylum, and he would actually talk to the mentally insane, talk to them in the sense of listening to them and having a conversation where he's trying to learn from them, trying to gather any sort of universal truths, because he assumed that perhaps these crazy people actually had access to these universal truths that normal people don't. And of course, other psychologists would say there's no point in doing so. Mentally insane people are insane. They are incoherent. But yet he approached it in a very inquisitive way. After a while, he started to really diverge in how he thought about understanding the human mind. He believed that really understanding the psyche or psychology was really a pathway towards understanding the soul. On the other hand, the mainstream thought, especially spearheaded by Freud, was that human psyche was something to be understood empirically, scientifically, almost like a pathology, that what a scientist would. So his views became very spiritual and divergent, and a lot of his colleagues started to believe that Jung was actually becoming more and more delusional and unscientific. Especially his relationship with Freud, they grew more and more bitter. They had really divergent views, and they had a falling out. They actually became rivals. Freud thought that Jung was entirely unscientific, and Jung, on the other hand, thought that Freud was limiting psychology and really its development. There's more for them to understand beyond the rigidity of the system that they had. But whatever it is, in 1913, Jung had a psychotic break. According to people around him, he actually had psychosis. He had a mental breakdown, apparently. He started to exhibit symptoms of someone who has psychosis. Apparently, he heard voices, he had hallucinations. But to Jung, what he was experiencing was something entirely new. It wasn't madness. In his own words, he said, to the superficial, to most people who are superficial, superficial. It may seem I'm mad, but I really am not mad. Some people said he became mad because of his esoteric studies that we talked about. But whatever's the case, he did something very different about it. He decided to conduct the most difficult experiment of his life, in his own words. He wanted to study the psychosis that he was going through. He saw these things that he experienced as visions, these hallucinations as visions, and he wanted to really capture and record and explore the universal truths that are behind these things, hopefully to understand more about the human soul. And how he did this was very interesting. So apparently in the daytime, or when he was normal, he would attend to his professional duties. He still had a practice, so he would see 5 patients a day, go to the professional events, spend time with his family. And then when he had time, or when these things were triggered, especially at night, he would actually take time to record down what he experienced, any vivid hallucinations, any dreams that he had. He would willfully experience these things. He would even induce them to try and experiment on himself, to capture his experience and his inquisition into his own soul. And he did all that and recorded all of it into journal entries, a series of journals which eventually codified into the Red Book. And it truly is very fascinating, because if you were to read through the Red Book, it's just so different. Again, Jung was a scientist by training. If you read his earlier papers, it was very scientific, very neutral. But the format and the language that occupies Red Book is really, really poetic, very personal, and just really, really strange. It's not written in a way that you would expect a scientist to write. It feels more like almost a dream journal, but of course very inquisitive as well. And if you were to read through the Red Book, what you find in there is rather strange writings of these experiences he had. Apparently, for example, in a big part of the first section of the book, he talks about the encounters he had with his own soul, and he actually had conversations with his soul, and he captured the dialogues into the book. It's just strange if you think about what he's suggesting there. And other parts of his books are really metaphorical. He talks about certain stories, certain visits to distant places, seeing different creatures, experiencing different things, and of course very deep thoughts about consciousness, about the soul and the human essence. But it's just so strange when you really read it. It's written very passionately, but very poetically and personally. Now, to really appreciate that, I'll read you a section of the book to give you an idea of how it sounds like. For example, from the beginning sections of the book, this is what he writes. My soul, where are you? Do you hear me? I speak. I call you. Are you there? I've returned. I'm here again. I've shaken the dust of all lands from my feet, and I've come to you. I'm with you. After long years of long wandering, I've come to you again. Should I tell you everything I've seen, experienced, and drunk in? Or do you not want to hear about all the noises of life and the world? But one thing you must know, the one thing I've learnt is that one must live this life. Do you so know me? How long the separation lasted? Give me your hand, my almost forgotten soul. How warm the joy at seeing you again, you long disavowed soul. Life has led me back to you. Let us thank the life I've lived for all the happy and all the sad hours, for every joy, for every sadness. My soul, my journey should continue with you. I will wander with you and ascend to my solitude. So as you can hear from my reading of it, that sounds almost like an excerpt from a piece of literature, not really from the journal of a psychologist, which is what makes it so fascinating. His background as really a scientist, yet he's actually come up with such expressive writings that was really part of this experiment on himself. And what is even more fascinating is that besides the expressive writing, he also illustrated his journals with these absolutely beautiful paintings that he did to try and capture what he saw in these visions that he talked about. And it truly is breathtaking to look at, because again, it's unlike anything you've really seen. At this point, reading through it with his calligraphy as well as these really, really abstract looking paintings, you'd imagine this is a book, like a religious text from the past, but no, it was written in the early 20th century by a psychologist experimenting on his own journey of the soul. So most people who have since read this book from 2009, they either fall into two camps. They either think that this book contains profound insights and knowledge about the universal truths about our soul and our human essence, about the psyche, or they're on the other side of the camp where they think that this is essentially the ramblings of a madman. Probably some of you thinking now, Melvin, what about you? What do you think about this book? What's the message of it? And I myself, it's really hard for me to really give you a discernible message because it truly is all over the place. I've read through a big portion of the book and he talks about really strange things like traveling with a soul through these different places, these different worlds. At one point talking about getting attacked by a giant serpent or creature. It's just all over the place and a lot of it is metaphorical, so it's really hard to take it literally. There are of course people who have attempted to analyze what he's trying to say here, but for me, the biggest takeaway is really this idea of introspection. See, what I see with this book is really this amazing attempt, a very beautiful attempt by scientists to really introspect within himself. He's dedicated so many years to discover deeper truths about himself and potentially the universe. It's really a quest of self-understanding. And why that's so beautiful is because when you're reading this, when you don't try and take it literally, it's just a person trying to dig deep within himself. And when you think about that, it's absolutely beautiful. You're reading into the soul, or at least the subconscious of someone, and he's tried to capture it in a very, very meticulous way as a scientist would. And why that's so beautiful is because, again, this gets you so close to him, despite the fact that he's passed away, but this is really an unfiltered look into the subconscious of Carl Jung. And the beauty of that is really this idea of introspection even within today. A lot of us don't even take a time to really do any introspection of our own. We don't even really think about ourselves and our own values, our very own psyche. We don't even take a moment to attempt to do so. But here it is, done so in a very beautiful way. And I think the takeaway for us is really that, the beauty of introspection. Perhaps by spending some time, it doesn't have to be to the extent of the book, of actually looking within ourselves. We might come to greater realizations about personal truths than we ever would, rather than just going along mindlessly every day. That there is a beauty in introspection, and this book can inspire us to do just that. And I think Jung realizes that. And really, to end this video, I'll read one more excerpt near the end of the book where he talks about this. And it is beautifully captured here. I too lived, which I had not done before, and which I could still do. I lived into the depths, and the depths began to speak. The depths taught me the other truth. It thus united sense and nonsense in me. I had to recognize that I am the only expression and symbol of my soul. In the sense of the spirit of the depths, I am as I am in this visible world, a symbol of my soul. And I am thoroughly a serf, completely subjugated, utterly obedient. The spirit of the depths taught me to say, I am a servant of the soul. And through this dictum, I learn above all, the most extreme humility. That's what I most need. And so that really is this idea that perhaps by digging within ourselves to explore the depths of ourselves, we might come to these realizations of our own.